Welcome to Per My Last Email. We're so glad to have you in the studio with us. I'm Kyle.
I'm Kaila.
And we'll be talking about imposter syndrome. Dun, dun, dun.
Very scary stuff. We have some hot takes about imposter syndrome.
It's a big syndrome. And, should you be worried about it if you've gone through it? How maybe you navigate that? If you've never experienced it, how you could maybe expand your mind about learning about it and how to be maybe an ally for people that are going through it. And yes, all the hot takes and tactics you need to navigate work life alongside our takes on imposter syndrome. So, Kaila, I know you have a good definition of imposter syndrome, and I think that's where we should start because this word gets thrown around a lot. I'm not sure everyone has the same definition of what it is. So set the scene. What are we talking about when we're talking about imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I am actually quite nervous about talking about imposter syndrome.
Are you an imposter syndrome about talking about imposter syndrome?
Yes, and
this is getting meta already.
This is so meta, but I think it's also something that people actually have. But as you just alluded to, it has kind of been like bastardized to mean something that it's not. So I want to be really careful and a little like overly scientific about what it actually is so that when we're making fun of people who say they have imposter syndrome, we're not talking about you.
This is like, according to Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, this is defines imposter. So the long story short is imposter syndrome is unfounded self-doubt. And I think that's where it gets a little tricky, right? Unfounded self-doubt. According to the NIH, imposter syndrome is the self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. This can come out in two different forms. It's either over-preparation for a task or a project or procrastination. Basically, both create a sense of fraudulency inside of someone. It's either I'm over preparing for this task, I have to work harder to achieve the same things that anyone else can, or it's I have to do everything last minute, I'm very panicked, I didn't prepare enough, and somehow I pulled it off, but everyone's going to see me as a fraud eventually. So there's actually 5 elements that this NIH study identified. I know, I'm nervous about this one. So the 5 elements that make up imposter syndrome generally, it doesn't mean you have to have all 5 elements, but they all contribute to this feeling of imposter syndrome or unfounded self-doubt, is perfectionism, feeling like you cannot make mistakes, super heroism, which basically is the need to be the best or perceived as the best, fear of failure, which I think is the most important and something that we will be talking about a lot, denial of competence, saying I am actually not as competent as I am perceived, and fear of success. So both fear of failure and fear of success, basically some fearful people
Sounds
over
like
here.
You're afraid.
Yeah. But in the fear of success, I was a little confused by this, so I dove a little deeper. And basically what they're saying is a difficulty recognizing and appreciating your own successes. So when you have a success, you're not recognizing it. And when you fail, you're really honing in on that failure and really beating yourself up over it.
Yeah. And I imagine, too, the fear of success could be like if you actually don't think you're deserving.
Right.
And you get another success, you're like, oh, now I have another layer of like fraud that eventually someone's going to find out about. So like you kind of shy away maybe from even getting a win because it's just more evidence that eventually someone's going to find out I'm not worthy.
Exactly. And I think one of the issues that I have with the term imposter syndrome is that it has been bastardized, right? And
Say more.
The unfounded self-doubt implies when you talk about I have imposter syndrome, you are saying I have unfounded self-doubt. That might be true. You might be having a difficulty recognizing your own successes, or you could be saying I'm a humble high achiever. And I don't even believe in myself, but I just keep achieving. It's that like humble brag moment. And so I think because so many people have taken imposter syndrome and taken it in a way that is not effective and like talked about it like, oh, I'm a white male CEO and I have had every benefit afforded to me and I have imposter syndrome. You might have imposter syndrome, but the reality is sometimes that's being used in a way that is not effective for actually addressing imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I hear you. I think there's a lot of people who have had a lot of success. They're like, white straight men, and they'll say like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing either.
Yeah.
And the intention is good. They're like,
Sometimes.
Sometimes maybe. We're all trying to figure it out. And like, I'm not perfect. And I recognize like there's things I don't know. But I think when people hear that who aren't in that like societal position, they're like, oh, really? Like it's been so tough for you when all of society is geared towards helping you succeed. And I think something I have realized is that if you are assumed to be competent, which in business is like white men, you see a ton of them on top of hierarchies. I think there's almost an assumed competence when you're looking at that demographic. Then admitting you don't know everything is actually viewed positively. People are like, wow, that's a humble leader. They recognize they don't know everything. That's great. When you're assumed incompetent, or maybe you don't see a lot of yourself in ranks of senior leadership, and you feel like people might doubt you are competent, admitting that you don't know everything can be weaponized against you.
Yeah,
and so then people are like, I knew she wasn't competent, and here she goes admitting it. Like, it's not a good sign. And so there's almost this different hierarchy or different impact of admitting you might not know. If you are assumed to be competent, it's viewed wonderfully. If you're assumed to be incompetent, it can be used against you. And I think that's why maybe there's this idea that I can't let anyone find out. I don't know, because it's going to be used against me.
Yeah, I think that's so valid. And I think that's why you see the real legit imposter syndrome shown more in women and minority groups, because they have been, I don't love like assumed incompetent, but they have been prejudiced against their entire careers, their entire lives. So we actually have a study by KPMG that showed that 75%, that's 3 out of every 4 women executives have experienced imposter syndrome at least once in their career.
Yeah. And
it's huge.
And there's another study by The Independent that said 54% of men had never experienced imposter syndrome. So you can see there's a clear gender difference in this. And like, just to get very vulnerable, I think I'm a straight white dude, and I can honestly say I've never really felt imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean I have always felt like I'm always competent, or like I'm always the perfect person for a role, or like I already have the skills, but I've always felt this ability to say like, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. And I've never felt like I don't belong. And so it's really hard for me to even wrap my head around what that feeling would be every day, to feel like they're going to find out I'm a fraud, or I don't belong. And so it's admittedly a tough topic for me to talk about, because I don't have a lot of good tips. I've never experienced it myself. I've been on the opposite side where like, I think you start to recognize like, oh, the entire system is here to make me feel comfortable.
Right.
And so I've never experienced it. I'm grateful for never experiencing it, but it's tough for me to relate to someone that has.
Yeah, it's really interesting and like genuinely fascinating to hear somebody who is admitting that they've never had imposter syndrome. I really respect that, because I think right now it's very cool to be like, yeah, I've suffered from imposter syndrome, regardless of what group you're a part of.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious, like, let's break it down a little bit, because I know for a fact you have absolutely admitted that you don't know things.
Yeah.
And said, I don't know what we're,
times.
Quite a few times. But I have never like penalized you for that personally. And I wonder, like, have you had self-doubt manifest at all in your career?
Yeah, I definitely have had self-doubt. And this is the thing that, again, it's hard for me to wrap my head around imposter syndrome perfectly, because some of the things you were saying, I don't even think they're bad things.
Yeah.
I think in order to be high achieving, you have to have a level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be a little bit of like, this might not go right. I need to put extra effort into this. I'm really worried that this meeting isn't going to go well, so I'm going to over-prepare. Yeah, there's over-preparing, but there is also just like over-preparing and it's good. Like, you've done your research and you're showing up and you're going to crush it. So a lot of the stuff that sounds bad for imposter syndrome, I think in the right doses is actually very healthy.
Yeah.
And so I would say I have a lot of the symptoms, but they're probably within the range that it's not detrimental. It's actually beneficial. I feel anxiety about my career all the time because I want to do great work. I want to keep growing in my career. And I know if I'm not working hard, that's not going to happen. So I have that. There's maybe been a few times where I was doing podcast production at my previous role, and I had only self-taught podcast experience. I learned audio engineering myself because I was doing a podcast on the side. So I maybe had this credentialism, like imposter syndrome, where I was like, I haven't actually been like formally trained. Do I know what I'm doing? But again, like it always just felt like the proof's in the pudding. I'm going to put my effort, into it. I'm going to create something. I'm going to show it to other people, and I trust they're going to tell me the truth. And if it's shitty, they're going to tell me this sucks. And then it's not an imposter syndrome. I just know, okay, I actually am an imposter. Time to get to work and get better. Or they're going to be honest, and they're going to say, this is good. And I don't have the like, are they lying to me? Am I going to get found out? I'm just trusting that the people around me are going to tell me the truth. And I'll use that to guide my next steps.
And that's one thing that, not to like decrease any of your accomplishments.
No, please do.
But this is
on my accomplishment.
No, this is kind of where I think there's two things here that I want to address. First is because the system is made to support you, you're given opportunities where you have a chance to prove yourself, where you may not have all the experience needed. So for example, you're self-taught in audio engineering. Chances are there's more hurdles that, let's say, a Black woman would have to go over in order to get that same job.
Right. They might need the actual
audio experience, right? There might, again, not saying in this exact situation, but there might be more hurdles for her to cross in order for her to get that job in the first place. So her having to present a front of being extremely experienced just to get the same opportunity that you had, where you were able to admit that you were a beginner and feel like, okay, I'm learning on the job. You're going to tell me if I'm bad at this. She had to put a front on or prove that she was very experienced. And any like weakness or self-doubt that she had, she wasn't able to show. And that's how she got that job.
100%.
Again, this is a fake example. So I'm not speaking from experience, but I do think it's one of those things that's important to point out.
It's a very real situation. And so to ask the question back to you, like, how has imposter syndrome showed up in your career? Because when I look at you, we've worked together for 3.5 years. I think of someone very competent, very smart, confident, like really, really great. And so to hear maybe that you've suffered from imposter syndrome in your career, it's like, oh, that's wild to me.
Right.
So how has it shown up in your career?
Yeah. So for better or for worse, I do have the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Oh, that's the best type of confidence.
Yeah.
That's right where you want to land.
Completely unfounded. I'm pretty confident I can do anything. No, I certainly have. I think at the very beginning of my career, I think when you're told consistently in your life that there are things that make you different, or there are things that you're othered in some way, even if it's not like directly, I think it has a really big impact on your perception of your success. So for example, at the beginning of my career, I got my internship at Goldman. And I remember one of the first 2 or 3 people I told mentioned that it was because my last name is Lopez and that I identify as a Hispanic woman. And that I'm white, obviously, very clearly.
You present so white.
I'm so white. But that's why I got into the program. And it genuinely had not occurred to me that was something, I, again, have the confidence of a white man. Like, it was like, wait, there's a reason why my achievements and my accomplishments could be like diminished in some way. And it took me genuinely years before I stopped questioning any new role or accolade that I received. Because of my last name.
It's really interesting because I feel like this is like either solution is bad, and just to like explain that a little more, there's a level where it's like you hear, oh, you just got this job because of your last name, and then you start to doubt, okay, maybe I did just get this job because of my last name, or they took it easy on me, and you start to devalue what you've actually accomplished. And then in the other side of things, we don't want a system that's just like ignores the inequities. And so it's tough because you want to create an environment where opportunity is given to the people that deserve it, and they feel like they earned it fairly. But also we have a system where inequity creates more inequity. And so we need, I think personally, interventions that are appropriate to make sure opportunity is given to everyone. And so I imagine it's just like a tough situation to be in, because either way, you're going to feel like, did I earn this?
And it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing for everyone, right? Like also the white men are like, oh, is it just that my dad is involved?
To be honest though, I've never thought that. Like,
But your dad is not involved in any of your project. You know, it's just
there's a different thing between like, yeah, I recognize it's on the whole easier for me to succeed, but I personally am not like, and that discounts all of the things I've accomplished.
Right.
And I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
But it's probably a different mindset that other people can't have, because there is this like context where they're always questioning, do I belong?
Right.
And yeah, for me, I've never felt like I didn't belong.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a key word here too, is belonging. And if you have a workplace where some people feel like they don't actually belong, they're probably going to suffer from imposter syndrome. It's probably going to hold their career back. And that's something to definitely be aware of.
Yeah, and I also think that has that constant questioning in your brain. Like, for example, when you were talking about you have the anxiety of, I want to over-prepare for this meeting because I want to do well. I think that's the right approach to having anxiety, right? It's like, oh, I'm in the right mindset because I'm going to over-prepare for this meeting. I'm going to do really well. But then the alternative is, oh, I'm over-preparing because I need to work harder to get to the same place that everyone else is.
Yep.
And that means that there's something lesser happening for me versus the mindset shift of, no, I want to be prepared. And so I'm going to work extra hard for this. So I think it's that it's the same experience, right? The same outcome. We're both over-preparing for a meeting. The difference is I'm beating myself up over feeling like I need to over-prepare in order to be viewed equally to the other people in the room, whereas you're like, I just want to be really prepared.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just the way that we're thinking about it is different.
Yeah,
and
the way you get to the result is a different path.
And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show.
So I have a take here for imposter syndrome. I love your reaction, because I think we're talking a lot about competence, and we're saying, you know, two people could be equally competent, but then one is less confident for maybe a variety of reasons, and that impacts the way that they show up, and then it might turn into imposter syndrome. I guess my argument would be that a job you deserve and a job you can have an opportunity for requires both competence and confidence.
Yeah.
And it seems like sometimes we position confidence as something that should be maybe like given to you or isn't important, like it's only about competence. But I would say to be a great leader, you have to be competent, obviously, but you also do have to be confident.
Yeah.
And I think that is important. And sometimes I think we joke about like, oh, this person's like confident, but they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And sometimes they shouldn't be. But I think the ability to have confidence is also a skill, and you can develop that skill. And I think sometimes we downplay that, but like it or not, that is a skill that gets rewarded in the workplace.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I don't think it's that people with imposter syndrome don't have the confidence. I think it's that they feel like their confidence is unfounded and that they're going to be found out as an imposter. So it's like they feel like they have the confidence potentially, but not the competence to back it up, when the opposite may actually be true. And I think it's like, how do we fix somebody feeling imposter syndrome? It's not necessarily like get your confidence up, because that may perpetuate the feeling of like, oh, I'm just putting on a face. The real me is less competent than they are confident.
Yeah.
So it's just like feeling I don't know, I'm getting lost in a loop, but like feeling more confident about your competence versus feeling more confident outwardly.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the rebuttal to what I was saying for my own, you know, my own argument would be that confidence is not just something that you can conjure up internally all the time. That might be part of it. But confidence is your relation to the environment and the social context you're in as well. And so for me, it is easy to feel confident because I'm surrounded by an environment where it feels like I belong. I can be confident.
Yeah.
It's allowed. And I can imagine getting to a level of confidence when you don't feel like maybe you belong is a lot more difficult. And so it does come back. I feel like, at least one of my takeaways from this conversation thus far is like the environment you create in the workplace really does matter, because it is going to allow everyone, fingers crossed, to feel confident and to show up as who they are and like really perform well.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think going back to kind of at the beginning, what we talked about with why imposter syndrome is such a buzzword right now, I think there's like 3 different versions of imposter syndrome that make it hard to really address and like change the environment to support people with actual imposter syndrome. So first one is, as we mentioned, the people that are using imposter syndrome as a humble brag. I have unfounded self-doubt, but really I'm super high achieving and I'm doing the best. And like, you look at how great I am.
Like
That's
you're the
bad.
CEO of Apple. Like you're good.
You're fine. Then there's people that are, hot take, actually imposters. And this isn't a bad thing, right? We talked about this a lot in Morning Brew Learning. New managers have extremely high imposter syndrome rates, but like it shouldn't be imposter syndrome. You're actually an imposter. You're doing a job that you've never done before, and you're trying to like lead a group.
Yeah.
That is very hard, and you can view yourself as an imposter, but it's not imposter syndrome necessarily.
And that's such a good point, because I think it's admitting that you are an imposter, which some people struggle to do.
Right, that you don't know what you're doing.
Going back to my original point,
Right.
because some people feel like if they admit that they don't know what they're doing, they'll be penalized.
Right.
So I imagine becoming a first-time manager, for some people it's very easy to be like, hey, I'm a first-time manager. I'm so dedicated to being the best manager I can, but it's going to be bumpy along the way because I'm learning alongside you to being your manager. And like, here's my plan, and I'm counting on you to hold me accountable and tell me where I can improve. That's easy for me to say. It might be a lot harder for someone else to say, but I think recognizing that there will be points in your career where you genuinely are an imposter, to your point, and you just have to learn and grow and get better is okay.
Right. And for that, the interventions required to make yourself feel better are so different than the interventions required for somebody with actual imposter syndrome, where instead of like feeling like I don't know what I'm doing and I have to pretend like I do, but everyone knows this is my first time in the role, like how to appropriately embrace a beginner's mindset that allows you to be honest and grow and still have like authority. I think that's like very different than the imposter syndrome, which is the genuine, unfounded self-doubt.
So you mentioned you had imposter syndrome maybe earlier in your finance job or at Goldman because of some comments, and you eventually like overcame it, quote unquote. Like, walk me through, what was that process like internally for you to overcome imposter syndrome?
Gosh, I mean, time, I think, and the leaving finance. Yikes.
That typically helps in all situations.
But I also think like realizing that the hard work that I was doing was paying off, not because I'm a Lopez, but because it was my actions were like causing real outcomes. And I think it really, truly, I can't like pinpoint a moment where I was like, I woke up today and I'm no longer an imposter. I don't have unfounded self-doubt. I think at the beginning of your career, the self-doubt is founded.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me to be like, oh, I had imposter syndrome outside of those comments that were made. So yeah, I think it was just time, and I think it was enough people like in my corner telling me my strengths and helping me work on my weaknesses that allowed me to like almost believe them.
Yeah.
Where typically, and I still do kind of do this, but I don't think it's imposter syndrome, where somebody says something nice and I'm like, oh, this is why they said that nice thing.
Oh, there's a reason behind it.
There's a reason behind it. They feel bad for me because I'm actually really bad at that thing that they just said I was good at. You know?
You figured me out.
It's like,
that's what I've been doing all these years. No, I like this idea of time just because like I think it's probably just the truth. Like unfortunately, it's something that some people deal with, and time will help. My question for you is like, is there, and I love this point you brought up about other people repeatedly telling you like, you belong here, you're great. Like you have to know that. Is there other things you wish would have happened that could have allowed you to either not feel it as strongly in the first place or to have gotten past it faster? Like advice to organizations who are trying to create an environment where people don't have to go through it for as long or as powerfully maybe as you did.
Right. First, the real answer is I wish I started therapy sooner.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think that a lot of that wasn't necessarily work. It's like imposter syndrome isn't just a career thing. It's a whole life thing.
Yeah.
And so it was affecting every element of my life. Just feeling like I don't belong, or, you know, I'm going to be found out, or like I'm whatever.
Yeah.
And therapy actually genuinely did help. For the organization side, I think it's like kind of obvious, but having an organization that reflects the population across every level. So if you have an environment where, let's say, talking specifically about men and women, it's 50-50 on the bottom entry level ranks. And then as you go up higher in the ranks, everyone becomes a white man. It's hard for you to believe that any progression that you have, first of all, is not because of your status as a woman, but also is not like you're not having to like climb extra hard.
Yeah. Or there's like an ultimate ceiling where like you just can't bust through it.
Right.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about therapy. I think that's a really great answer. And I think it speaks to the fact that imposter syndrome, we're talking about it at work, but like we live in a society, breaking news, and it is something that affects you everywhere you go. Like, and I think at our core, like all of us want to feel like we belong. And there's workplaces you can feel like you don't belong in, but there's also cities, there's communities, there's political systems, whatever it might be, where you feel like you don't belong as well. And I think just being aware of that is very helpful. Yeah,
I completely agree. And one other tip that I have, or tactic that I have, because spoiler alert, we are not solving imposter syndrome today.
I certainly am.
That's that blind self-confidence.
Yep, figured it out. 30 minutes, done.
Is to just force yourself to look for counterexamples. And I think that when you have this unfounded self-doubt, when you feel like that you're a fraud and you're going to be found out, like look for the counterexample there. So I am not good at this. People keep telling me I'm a bad public speaker. Well, okay, great. Morning Brew gave me a podcast, so perhaps that's a counterpoint.
Yeah, it's getting canceled after this episode.
Can you imagine? No, but like I think there's very real, okay, I created this amazing deck and 3 people slacked me about it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not, I'm not a fraud. Maybe that's actually a good deck. And maybe I am very good at, creating points and developing points visually.
Yeah. I love this point, and I think what I'm hearing is it's about trusting others. And I think like it kind of baffles me that you were saying like some people would slack you and like you'd think there was like a different motive. And
absolutely.
I hope,
honestly, to this day.
I hope that's not the case with us.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, I would say it's because like you trust me and I trust you to like tell the truth.
Yeah.
And if I tell you something is good, it's because I think it's actually good. And I've told you a lot of your stuff is very good. I've told you some of your stuff is bad, and vice versa. And I feel like it's one easy way to help overcome it is to have a really close relationship with someone and trust that they're telling you the truth. And so when they tell you you're great, like you're great. Lean into that. But if you don't have those relationships, you could be always like suspect about, are they actually telling me just what I want to hear? Is there some ulterior motive? So again, going back to belonging, not to make this the buzzword of the episode, but belonging at work, having people you trust, having close relationships, I think goes a long way to being like, the people put me here for a reason.
Yeah.
They want the business to succeed. They're putting me in a position to help the business succeed. They're smart. I trust their decisions. Therefore, like I'm in the right spot. To me, that's a very empowering feeling.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned our relationship because at the beginning, I remember so specifically like our first month.
Yeah.
I would like send you a piece of writing to be like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And you'd be like, oh, put it in the Louvre. Like, this is amazing. And I'd be like, this man is a liar.
Okay, maybe don't put it in the Louvre. I might have been hyperbolic, but I wasn't fully.
But no. But it took some time before, like, and when we had the relationship where you could be like, oh, I actually like wouldn't publish this, or I would change something. Where then when you actually did compliment my work or my writing, where it meant that much more.
Yeah.
So I think it's also that like radical candor, which we've talked about a lot, building those relationships with people where you feel like you can tell them the hard truth and the good truth, and that they can believe both. I think that's one way to help others kind of potentially get rid of that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and it's the beautiful thing about actually hearing constructive criticism, outside of the fact that it might help you, it gives you more belief that the person who's giving it to you is being truthful all the time. Because if they're willing to critique you, then like they would critique you if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So when they tell you something's great, like it's great.
Yeah.
You know they would tell you if it was bad, So yeah, I think those relationships are so important. Let's synthesize this because we've covered a lot of ground, and I hopefully you've learned new things about imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
If you've suffered from it, this has been maybe a relief, or you've learned some new tactics or tips. Like a last note for those listening who maybe have imposter syndrome, want to be better about thinking about creating workplaces with belonging. Any last like tips or tricks for you listening?
Yeah, not to get too like woo woo, but like you're not alone. There are probably a variety of people in your circle that are feeling the same way, and look for the others that are external, that are providing you feedback, positive and negative, that you trust, and listen to them more than you can listen to that little annoying self-doubt voice in your head telling you that they're lying to you, because they're probably not. And that's like the number one thing. Also look for counterexamples within your own self. You know, I felt really confident in that deck. I must be good at decks, versus telling yourself that you're some type of fraud. But it's a really hard thing to overcome. And it's completely valid to still feel it and feel like it's not solved after 30 minutes of talking.
Yeah, we can verify we have not solved it.
Yeah.
I think for me, my big takeaway is, you know, it's not something that I've felt with. So I hear what you're saying, but it's not something that I can really like internalize and be like, I totally get it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like, one, just don't lie. Like,
Yeah.
two, I think you don't have to feel ashamed if you haven't felt it. Because I think that would be the goal. It's like, no one
Yeah.
feels like an imposter, but I think recognizing that like my ability to be confident or belonging, it doesn't come as easily to other people for a variety of like very legitimate reasons. And I think if you're trying to build a really dynamic team or a really dynamic company, you need to be aware that there might be some people who are so talented but have imposter syndrome, and that imposter syndrome is getting in the way of them being even better. And you need to think about critically, like, how can you help remove that doubt, create a sense of belonging so you can build the most dynamic teams. So I think it is the job of all of us to create an environment where like everyone can thrive, everyone can feel like they belong,
Yeah.
and you have the team and the best company possible.
I think that's a fantastic place to wrap.
I love it. Well, thanks for sharing. That
This was
great.
fun. This was great.
It was a very fun conversation. Should we roll the credits?
Let's do it.
Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Uchenna Wogu.
Kelsey Jones is our senior production manager.
And our chief content officer is Devin Emery.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.